Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really substantial. We've got this incredibly detailed dossier in front of us, and it goes way beyond the headlines about Iran.
It really does. We're not just looking at incidents, we're digging into the actual mechanics, the deep operational structure of authoritarian control within the country.
Exactly. Our sources connect the dots from the very concrete reality of state repression, the geopolitical moves, all the way to the profound ideological and even theological ideas that the regime uses to justify its existence.
That's the mission for today. We want to give you a really clear picture of the Iranian security state. Think of it like a system sometimes called the tripod of tyranny.
Tripod, okay.
Yeah, because it stands on three main legs. We're talking about a vertically integrated system. So the physical forces on the street, the digital surveillance apparatus, and the judicial system that enforces it, they all ultimately answer to the same central authority.
So not separate competing entities, really.
Not in the way you might think. They work together, reinforcing each other. Our goal is to dissect this whole architecture, understand the ideology that holds it all together, and then look at the really tough strategic questions about what, if anything, the outside world or internal actors can do.
And just to ground this immediately, if you need a stark measure of what we're discussing, let's pull out one key data point from the sources right away. Iran's 2025 Freedom House score.
Ah, yes. It's grim.
It's 11, just 11 out of a possible 100. That puts Iran solidly in the not-free category on a global scale. And that number, it isn't just a bad report card.
No, it reflects a deliberate, carefully constructed, and tragically successful system designed to control political rights and basic civil liberties. That 11 out of 100 is the direct outcome of the very system we're about to break down.
So we need to get past just hearing about arrests or sanctions. We need to see the whole structure, top to bottom.
Precisely. We want to connect the tangible things like the specific security units you might see to the more abstract, the almost apocalyptic ideas driving the regime. We're looking for those moments where you see how the machine functions and why they believe they're justified in running it that way.
Okay, let's start at the absolute top, the power structure. Our sources are very clear. Ultimate authority rests with the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to understand he's not just a figurehead. He's the ultimate religious and political authority. He appoints and can dismiss the heads of the most critical institutions.
Which are?
The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the judiciary, and state media, state broadcasting. That direct control means he commands the key levers, force, the interpretation of law, and the flow of information.
And this structure, it deliberately bypasses the elected parts of the government, doesn't it? It's like a parallel state.
That's a very accurate way to put it. A state within a state. The IRGC is the prime example. It's enormous. It has vast economic holdings, its own ground, air, and naval forces completely separate from the regular military, the Artesh.
Its job isn't just external defense.
Critically, no. Its founding mandate, its explicit purpose, is to protect the Islamic Revolution from threats both foreign and domestic. Suppressing internal dissent is core to its identity.
Okay, so that leads us directly into the first pillar of this tripod you mentioned, the most visible one.
Yeah.
The boots on the ground. The IRGC and its massive domestic arm, the Basij.
Right, the Basij. Officially, the Sazemani Basij Mustazafin. The name itself is interesting. Organization for the Mobilization of the Oppressed.
Ironic, given its role.
Deeply ironic. It's essentially a nationwide paramilitary force, but it's commanded by the IRGC. Think of it as the IRGC's eyes, ears, and enforcers embedded deep within society.
Embedded where, specifically?
Everywhere. Schools, universities, government offices, factories, neighborhoods, they are woven into the fabric of daily life.
And the scale of this. It's hard to grasp. The sources mention estimates for the number of local siege bases, the PEGA.
Yeah, the numbers are staggering. Official estimates suggest somewhere between 40,000 and 54,000 of these local bases across Iran.
40 to 54,000.
Just pause on that for a second. That's potentially a base in almost every significant neighborhood, every university campus, every large workplace.
So it's not just about mobilizing crowds for pro-regime rallies.
Not at all. That density is terrifying from a surveillance perspective. A PEGA is a hub for local informants, for people monitoring social behavior, enforcing morality codes, reporting suspicious activity, whether it's online or offline.
And they're the first responders in crackdowns.
Often, yes. They are designed for rapid mobilization to suppress protests. We saw them spearheading the crackdowns in the Green Movement in 2009, again in the deadly protests of 2019. 2019, and absolutely centrally in the woman, life, freedom protests starting in 2022. Their constant presence means repression isn't just an event, it's a background hum in everyday life.
Let's talk about the specific units doing this social control. They fall under the main police umbrella, FRAJ, right?
Yes, FRAJ is the law enforcement command of the national police structure. But within that, you have specialized units. The most infamous, globally, is probably the Guidance Patrol.
The Gashti Irshad, the morality police.
Exactly. Their main visible job is enforcing the compulsory hijab rules and other public chastity regulations. Now, there was some confusion after the 2022 protests. Maybe some hope they were being disbanded.
Right, there were reports, but they seemed short-lived.
Very short-lived. The sources confirm they were back on the streets enforcing rules quite quickly in 2023. And crucially, this street-level enforcement was then backed up, formalized by a new, harsher legislation.
The hijab and chastity law from 2024.
Precisely. That law was significant because it didn't just rely on patrols anymore. It integrated technology and, frankly, citizen reporting into the repression.
How so? What did it change?
Well, it mandated the use of automated surveillance, specifically facial recognition technology, to identify women deemed non-compliant in public spaces.
Facial recognition for hijab enforcement.
Yes. And it didn't stop there. It gave the state powers to impose fines automatically, track movements, even impound vehicles if the driver or passengers were violating the code. It essentially weaponized the state's administrative and technological capacity against women's bodies.
Turning gender discrimination into this automated, tech-driven system of control and punishment.
It's a stark example of institutionalized repression. It moved beyond just physical intimidation on the street.
And the key point about the IRGC and Basij structurally is a reporting line, isn't it?
Yeah.
They don't answer to the elected government.
That's fundamental. They report directly to the supreme leader, often through clerical representatives embedded within their command structure. This insulates them, meaning they operate with a near total impunity from any kind of civilian oversight or legal accountability from, say, the parliament or the president's office. Their actions are often described as deniable or opaque operations.
Because they answer to the highest religious political authority, they're essentially shielded.
Exactly. It gives them a kind of spiritual and political cover that regular law enforcement doesn't have. It allows them to use lethal force, detain people arbitrarily, and employ torture, knowing the system will protect them.
Okay, that's the physical pillar. Let's pivot to the second leg of this tripod. This is where the control gets very modern, very high-tech, digital domination and surveillance.
Right. And this pillar is absolutely crucial today because it's how the regime tries to preempt and disrupt any organized opposition before it even gets going. And it blocks the documentation of abuses.
They're not just listening, they're actively weaponizing the internet and connectivity itself.
Absolutely. It's an offensive strategy. There are several agencies involved, and their roles can sometimes seem to overlap, creating a kind of confusing but comprehensive net.
Who are the main players?
You have FATA, which is the Iranian cyber police. They're the more visible arm, the ones who might issue public warnings about online content or make arrests for things posted on social media.
So uniformed cyber cops.
In a sense. But then you have the much more powerful and much more shadowy IRGC intelligence organization. They handle the deep surveillance, the hacking, both domestic and foreign, and countering perceived cyber threats. They operate with far less transparency.
And coordinating all this at the policy level.
That's the Supreme Council of Cyberspace, the SEC. It was created by Khamenei himself by decree back in 2012. It centralizes all major decisions about Iran's digital infrastructure, content filtering, cybersecurity policy. Basically, the entire online ecosystem is governed by the supreme leader's inner circle through the SEC.
And the legal basis for arrests, you mentioned earlier, it's broad.
Terrifyingly broad. The main law is the Computer Crimes Law from 2009. It criminalizes things that are incredibly vague, like the propagation of freedom-seeking ideas. What does that even mean in legal terms?
It means whatever they want it to mean.
Precisely. It also criminalizes things like using strong encryption. So trying to communicate securely can itself be deemed a crime. This gives them the legal pretext to arrest almost anyone engaging in activism or journalism online. And there were proposals for an even harsher cyber bill around 2025 to increase these powers further.
What are the main tactics they use in this digital war zone? The most dramatic one we hear about is the kill switch.
Yes, the systematic internet blackouts. This is perhaps their bluntest digital weapon used during times of major unrest.
like in 2019.
November 2019 is the most notorious example. During the massive protests sparked by fuel price hikes, the regime implemented a near-total shutdown of internet access across the country for several days.
Why? What was the strategic goal?
It was brutally tactical. The primary goal was to conceal the scale of the violence being used by the security forces, mainly the Basij and IRGC. They were killing protesters en masse.
So cutting off the internet stopped people coordinating, but also stopped evidence getting out.
Exactly. It prevented citizens from organizing effectively, sharing information about protest locations, or warning each other. And crucially, it stopped them from uploading videos and photos of the massacres to the outside world in real time. The sources confirm hundreds, possibly up to 1,500, were killed during that blackout.
And they used this tactic again later.
Yes, they deployed similar tactics, often more localized or targeted, during the Women, Life, Freedom protests in 2022 and 2023. Shutting down mobile data or throttling speeds in specific cities or regions experiencing unrest became standard procedure.
But their long-term strategy isn't just about shutting things down, is it? It's about building their own controlled internet.
That's the end game, yes. It's called the National Information Network, or NIN, often referred to as a national intranet or halal internet.
What is it designed to do?
The goal is to create a domestic digital ecosystem where essential services, banking, government portals, maybe some approved domestic communication platforms can function independently of the global internet.
So they can cut off the outside world, but keep basic internal functions running.
Precisely. In a crisis, they wouldn't necessarily need a total blackout. They could sever the connections to the global web, effectively trapping users inside the NIN, unable to access outside information, social media, or secure international communication tools while still maintaining a degree of internal digital order. It's about isolation and control.
And looking at developments in 2024, 2025, the tech is escalating even further. Drones, facial recognition again, and even citizen reporting apps.
Yes, the digital escalation is relentless. The deployment of facial recognition systems, as we mentioned with the hijab law, but also potentially for identifying protesters in crowds via CCTV and drones. And then there's the Nazar app.
What's that?
It's reportedly an app that allows ordinary citizens, or perhaps Basij members more specifically, to report violations like women not wearing the hijab correctly in cars by submitting license plate numbers.
Outsourcing surveillance to the population.
It creates a climate of pervasive monitoring and encourages citizens to police each other on behalf of the state. It's deeply insidious.
So the expert analysis here is that digital control isn't just one tool. It's a force multiplier for the entire system.
Absolutely. It disrupts organization, it prevents the documentation and sharing of abuses, which could fuel further dissent or international pressure, and ultimately, it helps identify individuals who are then fed into the third pillar of the tripod, the judicial system.
Which is where the regime puts a legal stamp on the repression.
Right.
Let's talk about Pillar 3, the judicial pathway to terror. This mainly involves the revolutionary courts, right?
Yes, the revolutionary courts are the engine room for legalizing political repression. Like the IRGC, their leadership is appointed by and answers to the supreme leader, guaranteeing zero judicial independence when it comes to politically sensitive cases.
What kinds of cases do they handle?
Primarily cases related to protests, free speech, activism, espionage, anything vaguely defined as undermining national security.
And the process itself, due process.
Non-existent, according to human rights groups cited in our sources. Trials are often incredibly swift, sometimes lasting only minutes. They are held in secret. Defendants often lack access to lawyers of their choosing or have very limited time to prepare a defense. Evidence is often flimsy or based entirely on forced confessions.
Which brings us to the charges themselves. The sources highlight two particularly terrifying broad charges used to impose the death penalty: Muharebe and Mafsed Felars.
These are the regime's deadliest legal weapons against dissent. Muharebe translates roughly as waging war against God.
Waging war against God. For protesting.
Yes, participating in protests, criticizing the regime, sometimes even vague association with opposition groups can be framed as Muharebe. And Mafsed Felars means spreading corruption on earth.
Again, incredibly broad.
Exactly. These aren't legal terms based on specific, clearly defined criminal actions in the way we normally understand law. They are theological concepts that have been weaponized to allow revolutionary court judges to sentence political opponents, activists, even just protesters caught in the street, to death.
And the path to getting that conviction often starts with abuse in detention.
Systemic abuse. The sources consistently detail the routine use of torture and ill treatment in Iranian prisons, particularly notorious ones like Evin Prison in Tehran or Karchak Women's Prison.
What kind of torture?
Beatings, prolonged solitary confinement, denial of medical care, threats against family members, and psychological torture are commonly reported. The explicit goal is often to extract forced confessions,
Confessions which are then used in court.
often as the primary or only evidence presented in these revolutionary court trials. These confessions are sometimes filmed and broadcast on state television.
Serving two purposes then. Legalizing the sentence and terrifying the public.
Precisely. It's a performance of state power designed to demoralize potential dissenters. The security forces, the IRGC, the intelligence ministry, operate knowing that whatever concession they produce, the courts are likely to accept it and issue the desired sentence, up to and including execution. It's a conveyor belt.
And the statistics on executions.
Mm-hmm.
They show a clear trend, don't they? A deliberate surge.
The numbers cited in the sources are horrifying and point to a calculated escalation. Over 900 executions were reported in 2024. That was the highest number since 2015.
And it didn't stop there.
No, the trend apparently accelerated into 2025. Some sources recorded more than 1,000 executions in just the first 9 months of 2025. This isn't about crime rates. It's clearly state-sanctioned killing on a massive scale, used as a tool of political control to instill fear.
Is this across the board, or are certain groups targeted more?
There's a deeply concerning pattern of disproportionate targeting. The sources consistently highlight that ethnic minorities, particularly Baluch Iranians from the southeast and Kurdish Iranians from the northwest, are executed at rates far exceeding their percentage of the population.
Suggesting these executions serve political and perhaps ethnic suppression goals as well.
It strongly suggests that. These communities often face systemic discrimination and are located in regions with long histories of unrest or separatist movements. The death penalty appears to be used as a tool to crush dissent, specifically within these minority populations.
So to sum up part one then, we have this integrated system. The IRGC and Basij provide the force and surveillance on the ground. The digital apparatus disrupts, monitors, and identifies targets, and the revolutionary courts provide the legal justification, often using torture-induced confessions and vague charges to imprison or execute opponents, all under the ultimate authority of the supreme leader who ensures impunity throughout the chain.
That's the closed circuit: arrest, torture, sentence, often execution, a seamless machine of repression.
Okay, so we've laid out the architecture of control, the how. It's incredibly comprehensive, incredibly brutal. But history shows that even against such a system, Iranians have repeatedly risked everything to challenge it.
Absolutely. Understanding what the nature of that defiance over the last couple of decades is crucial, and then connecting it to the why, the deep ideological reasons the regime reacts with such ferocity.
Let's look at the major waves of protest mentioned in the sources, starting with the Green Movement back in 2009. What was different about that?
The Green Movement was sparked by the disputed presidential election results. Its initial demands were largely political, where is my vote? It was centered more in urban areas, particularly Tehran, and involved a significant middle-class element.
The regime's response.
It was a shock to many observers, and certainly to the participants. Massive force was used. Sources estimate over 7,000 people were arrested. Critically, the figures associated with the movement, the reformist candidates Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mehdi Karoubi, were placed under house arrest.
And they still are, aren't they?
Yes, years later, still under house arrest. That move effectively decapitated the movement's political leadership and sent a clear message. Even challenging the system within its own supposed rules wouldn't be tolerated.
Fast forward a decade to November 2019. Bloody November. Very different trigger. Very different demographic.
Completely different. This was sparked by a sudden, sharp increase in fuel prices. The protests erupted spontaneously across the country, often in smaller cities and towns, and involved more working-class and economically marginalized Iranians. The anger was raw, visceral.
And the regime's response reflected that shift.
It did. Because the protests were so widespread and decentralized, the state deployed its most brutal tool, the near-total internet blackout we discussed.
To prevent coordination and hide the violence.
Exactly. Under the cover of that digital darkness, security forces used lethal force on an unprecedented scale since the revolution itself. Amnesty International verified over 300 deaths, but credible estimates cited in the sources go much higher, up to 1,500 killed. It showed the regime was willing to massacre its own citizens to maintain control when faced with widespread economic unrest.
And then the most recent major wave, woman, life, freedom, starting in late 2022, triggered by the death of Mahsa Amini.
Yes, Masa, or Gina Amini, her Kurdish name. Her death in the custody of the Guidance Patrol ignited something profound. This movement was different again.
Hi, sir.
Its core demand wasn't just political reform or economic relief. It was about fundamental social freedoms, bodily autonomy, and challenging the state's right to dictate personal life. The slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom," directly challenged the ideological pillars of the Islamic Republic.
An existential threat in their view.
Absolutely, and the response was correspondingly massive and brutal. Over 551 people killed, including, tragically, at least 68 children. Over 22,000 arrested. The violence was widespread and systematic.
And this is where the UN finding comes in.
Yes, the UN's independent international fact-finding mission on Iran investigated the crackdown and found evidence of actions that constituted crimes against humanity, specifically citing murder, imprisonment, torture, rape, and sexual violence used systematically against protesters, particularly women and girls.
That finding of crimes against humanity is incredibly significant legally and morally.
It underscores the systematic, state-directed nature of the violence. It wasn't just excessive force, it was a deliberate policy to crush dissent through terror.
And within these national crackdowns, the sources highlight specific instances of disproportionate violence against minorities, like in Zahedan.
Yes, Bloody Friday in Zahedan, the capital of Sistan in Baluchistan province, on September 30th, 2022. Security forces opened fire on protesters and worshippers near a mosque, killing at least 82 Baluchi individuals in a single day.
82 people.
It was a massacre, and it highlighted yet again the particularly brutal treatment reserved for ethnic minorities who challenged the state, linking back to the execution statistics we discussed.
So looking across these 2 decades, 2009, 2019, 2022, what's the consistent theme in the regime's playbook?
Overwhelming force, communications blackouts when feasible, mass arrests, and crucially, the narrative. The regime consistently refuses dialogue and frames all internal dissent, no matter the cause, as foreign sedition or plots orchestrated by enemies like the U.S., Israel, or Saudi Arabia.
That framing, that refusal to engage, is not accidental, is it?
Not at all. The consistent absence of dialogue isn't a policy failure. It is the policy. Because from the regime's perspective, you cannot dialogue with traitors, with agents of foreign powers, or with those challenging a divinely ordained system.
Which brings us right to the ideological core, the why. Why is this regime so resistant, so willing to use such extreme measures? It starts with the doctrine of velayat-e faqih, right?
Exactly. Velayat-e faqih, roughly guardianship of the jurist. This is the foundational doctrine articulated by Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic.
What does it mean in practice?
It asserts that during the occultation, the absence of the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, who Shia Muslims believe will return as a savior figure, the most qualified Islamic jurist should hold supreme political and religious authority over the state. That jurist is the supreme leader.
So it fuses religious and political authority in one person.
Completely. And it frames the state itself not just as a government, but as something much more profound. The guardian of a civilizational mission. Its purpose is seen as implementing Islamic law and preparing the world for the eventual return of the Mahdi.
This gives the supreme leader immense power and legitimacy within their system.
It grants him near absolute constitutional power and a kind of religious immunity. It justifies why key institutions like the IRGC and the judiciary answer only to him, bypassing any democratic accountability. They are instruments of this guardianship.
And this connects directly to the mobilization aspect, the idea of Mahdism, anticipating the Mahdi's return.
Yes, the regime heavily utilizes Mahdist beliefs and rhetoric to motivate its base and its security forces. Khomeini's call for an army of 20 million, which helped institutionalize the Basij, was steeped in this idea of popular mobilization for a sacred cause.
And the forces themselves, the IRGC and Basij, see themselves in this light.
The rhetoric constantly reinforces this. They are often referred to and refer to themselves as the soldiers of Imam Mahdi, or soldiers of Imam Zaman, another title for the Mahdi.
So suppressing a protest isn't just police work.
In their worldview, it's far more than that. It's defending the Islamic Revolution, protecting the path for the Mahdi's return, fighting against the forces of corruption and foreign influence that seek to undermine this sacred mission. It sacralizes their violence. It makes dissent not just illegal, but a form of spiritual treason.
That's why the IRGC is so untouchable. They're not just soldiers, they're holy warriors in this narrative.
Precisely. Challenging the IRGC is challenging the guardians of the revolution itself, the vanguard preparing for the end times.
And this mission isn't purely domestic. It extends beyond Iran's borders through the concept of exporting the revolution.
Correct. Article 154 of the Iranian constitution explicitly commits the state to supporting the oppressed and just struggles around the world. This is the ideological justification for the IRGC's external operations arm, the Quds Force.
And the Quds Force builds the axis of resistance.
Exactly. The Quds Force cultivates, funds, trains, and arms a network of proxy militias across the Middle East, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Palestine.
This isn't just foreign policy. It's fulfilling a constitutional ideological mandate.
It's seen as enacting that revolutionary duty, pushing back against perceived enemies, primarily the U.S. and Israel, and expanding Iranian influence under the banner of resisting oppression.
Which brings us to the specific objective regarding Israel. The sources mentioned Khamenei's 9-point plan.
Yes, the regime publicly maintains a long-term strategic goal of eliminating the state of Israel. Khamenei's plan, often referenced, suggests achieving this not through direct invasion, but through sustained pressure, and ultimately a referendum involving Palestinians, including refugees, to determine the future government.
But backed by force.
Backed by the constant military and political pressure exerted by Iran's proxies, particularly Hezbollah on Israel's northern border and groups in Gaza. The goal is to make Israel's existence unsustainable over the long term.
So this dual identity is key. The IRGC as both a brutal domestic repressor and the vanguard of regional revolution.
And both roles are justified by the same core ideology, Velayat-e-Faqih, and the mission to prepare for the Mahdi. This is why internal dissent is treated so ruthlessly. It's seen as undermining not just the government, but the entire sacred project, both at home and abroad.
Okay, so we've painted a picture of a deeply entrenched system, formidable security forces, pervasive digital control, a ruthless judiciary, all bound together by this powerful, almost apocalyptic ideology. It raises a huge question. What could possibly be done?
That's the core dilemma, especially when tensions flare up regionally, as the sources note happen repeatedly, including referencing events like the reported Israeli strike in June 2025 that allegedly killed a top IRGC commander, Hossein Salami. In those moments, the debate about external intervention gets very loud.
The idea of foreign-imposed regime change, or FIRC, is it a viable option, according to the analysis we have?
The overwhelming consensus in the strategic analysis presented in these sources is that FIRC is not only incredibly risky, but likely counterproductive for Iran.
Let's break down the arguments against it. What's the first major critique?
Legality and legitimacy. From an international law perspective, launching a war explicitly for regime change, outside of immediate self-defense recognized under UN Charter Article 51 or a specific UN Security Council mandate, is illegal.
So it undermines the very international order it might claim to uphold.
Exactly. It sets a dangerous precedent and gives the intervention a massive legitimacy problem from the start, potentially alienating allies and undermining global norms against aggression.
Okay, legality aside, what about practicality? Does FIRC actually work in achieving stable democratic outcomes?
History offers a pretty grim verdict here. The sources point to the recent painful examples of Iraq after 2003 and Libya after 2011. In both cases, external military intervention successfully toppled the dictator.
But didn't lead to stable democracy.
Far from it. It led to state collapse, prolonged civil war, the rise of extremist groups like ISIS filling the power vacuum, and immense human suffering. Iran is vastly larger, more populous, and arguably more complex institutionally and ethnically than either Iraq or Libya. The risk of catastrophic state failure following FIRC is extremely high.
And there's another crucial risk, isn't there? What happens inside Iran if it's attacked from the outside?
This is the rally around the flag effect. It's a classic phenomenon in international relations. Even people who despise their own government often feel compelled to unite against a foreign attacker.
So an external attack could actually strengthen the regime's hold, ironically.
It's highly likely. An attack, especially one perceived as led by the U.S. or Israel, would probably trigger intense Iranian nationalism. It could unify elements of the security forces, like the IRGC and the regular army, the Artesh, who sometimes have tensions, against the common enemy.
And what about the genuine pro-democracy activists inside Iran?
This is perhaps the most tragic potential consequence. An external attack would allow the regime to instantly brand all internal dissenters and pro-liberty activists as traitors, as collaborators with the foreign enemy. It would destroy their legitimacy and moral authority within the country, making internally driven change even harder.
So the strategic conclusion from the sources seems clear. Large-scale military intervention is more likely to lead to wider regional war, potentially state collapse in Iran, and paradoxically, deeper repression of the Iranian people than it is to democratic liberation.
That's the strong consensus presented. The cure could be far worse than the disease, potentially engulfing the entire region in conflict.
If war isn't the answer, then what is? What does a non-military path look like, according to these analyses?
The focus shifts entirely to supporting internal resilience and enabling change. That is, as the sources put it, owned by Iranians. The goal isn't to impose a solution from outside, but to empower Iranians themselves to determine their future when political space eventually opens up, whether through regime infighting, economic pressure, or a future succession crisis.
What are the concrete elements of that strategy?
Number one is information freedom. This means actively working to counteract the regime's digital blackouts and censorship, supporting access to secure satellite internet, funding the development and dissemination of anti-censorship tools, ensuring communication channels can stay open, especially during crackdowns. Information is oxygen for dissent.
And accountability. Sanctions.
Yes, but targeted accountability, not broad economic sanctions that often punish the general population and can be used by the regime for propaganda. Instead, the focus should be on Magnitsky-style sanctions targeting specific individuals directly involved in human rights abuses.
Like specific judges, prison officials, IRGC commanders.
Exactly. Naming and shaming them, freezing their assets, imposing travel bans. This puts direct pressure on the actual perpetrators within the repressive apparatus, potentially creating fissures or deterring others without harming ordinary Iranians. Supporting civil society resilience. This means finding ways to assist independent journalists, human rights defenders, labor unions, student groups, women's rights networks, both those inside Iran, where possible, and those operating in exile, helping them document abuses, maintain networks, develop organizational capacity so they are ready to play a role in a future transition.
So the idea is to strengthen Iranian society's ability to resist and eventually reclaim its own future, rather than having a future imposed.
That's the core principle. It's a long-term strategy focused on empowerment, not intervention.
Now, this whole struggle, the repression, the resistance, the strategic debates you argued earlier, it's all underpinned by deep ideological and even theological claims by the regime. Let's dive into that final layer. How does theology play into this?
It's absolutely central. The regime's entire claim to legitimacy rests on velayat-e faqih, which is fundamentally a theological assertion that a cleric holds God's authority on earth in the Mahdi's absence. This claim, however, is open to theological critique, even from within religious traditions.
The sources use an interesting analogy involving the Lord's Prayer. Can you unpack that?
Right. It points to the prayer, "Our Father in heaven, thy kingdom come." The analysis highlights that the prayer is addressed to God the Father, the ultimate source. It asks for God's kingdom, God's divine harmony, what might be called Sakya Yuga in other traditions, to manifest.
And Jesus' role in that.
Jesus, in this interpretation, acts as the high priest, the guide, the one who teaches how to pray for the Father's kingdom. He doesn't claim to be the Father or that his earthly presence is the final kingdom itself.
So the critique is that systems like velayat-e faqih confuse the roles.
Exactly. The critique suggests that when a human authority, like the faqih, claims near absolute power as the necessary gateway to or representative of God's kingdom on earth, it risks collapsing that distinction. It potentially confuses the messenger or the guardian with the ultimate king, confusing a political structure with divine rule itself.
How does this relate to core Islamic theology, specifically the concept of tawhid?
Tawhid is the absolute cornerstone of Islam, the doctrine of God's radical oneness and uniqueness. It fiercely rejects shirk associating partners with God. The Quran emphasizes God's transcendence. He begets not, nor is he begotten. God is utterly other.
And the regime uses this idea of transcendence.
Yes, the regime's clerical establishment often emphasizes God's absolute otherness, tanzi, to justify its own role as the necessary interpreters and enforcers of God's law, arguing they are preserving that divine purity from human corruption.
But there's a philosophical critique of that position mentioned in the sources.
Yes, a subtle but powerful one. The critique asks, if you emphasize God's transcendence so extremely, saying God cannot manifest in relatable ways or cannot be intimately known, do you inadvertently limit God's omnipotence? If God is truly infinite, why couldn't the infinite choose to manifest within the finite, for instance?
So denying God's potential immanence or relatability paradoxically makes God distant.
It risks making God remote, abstract, and inaccessible. And when the divine feels inaccessible, what fills the vacuum? Often, it's a human political or religious structure that claims exclusive rights to speak for that distant God.
Like the Velayat Faqih system itself.
The argument is that Velayat Faqih becomes a kind of political manifestation of this imposed distance, claiming authority precisely because God is deemed too transcendent to rule directly. It turns a spiritual principle into a justification for absolute human political power. This is where internal religious dissent comes, and critics within Iran argue the regime has usurped the Mahdi's true spiritual message of justice and compassion and replaced it with authoritarian brutality, all while claiming prepare for his return.
It's fascinating how these deep theological debates intertwine with the raw political struggle. But the sources also point to something shared across faiths, a kind of common hope.
Yes, despite the doctrinal differences and political conflicts, there's a remarkable eschatological convergence, a shared yearning for a future restoration of divine order and justice.
How so?
Judaism and Christianity await the Messiah or the return of Christ. Hinduism anticipates the Kalki avatar to end the current age of darkness, Kali Yuga, and usher in an age of truth, Satya Yuga. And Shia Islam, as central to the Iranian regime's identity, awaits the return of the Mahdi.
So everyone is waiting for a kingdom of God in some form.
In some form, yes. This suggests that the ultimate battleground, perhaps even more than the streets of Tehran or the digital networks, is spiritual. It's about correctly discerning the path to that true divine justice and recognizing the signs of its arrival. #OutTower.
Wow, we have covered a vast amount of ground today.
Wow.
We've dissected the mechanics of Iran's repressive tripod, the IRGC and Basij's physical control, FATA and the SEC's digital fortress, the Revolutionary Court's judicial terror.
And we've traced how that entire machinery is animated by a potent, deeply held ideology of Velayat Faqih and Mahdism, justifying both domestic brutality and regional expansionism.
We explored the cycles of courageous defiance by the Iranian people over decades, met consistently with overwhelming state violence and a refusal to engage, always framing dissent as foreign plots.
And critically, we examine the strategic dilemmas, concluding from the sources that external military intervention is fraught with peril and likely counterproductive, pointing instead towards supporting internal resilience and information freedom.
The key takeaway seems to be the sheer integration of this system. It's not just one thing. It's the security, the digital, the judicial, and the ideological, all working together, making it incredibly resilient.
That resilience is why understanding the ideological core is so vital, and why the path forward, according to the analyses we reviewed, really has to focus on enabling Iranians to challenge and ultimately change that system from within.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. It steps back from the immediate politics and strategy into that deeper spiritual dimension we touched upon.
We've seen this convergent theme. Major world faiths anticipate a future divine intervention, a return, a restoration of justice, whether it's called the Messiah, the Christ, Kalki, the Mahdi, or simply the Kingdom of God.
Now, if that anticipation is real, the sources implicitly raise a crucial question. What is the greatest danger? Is it that this figure or order simply won't arrive? Or is it something else?
The sources seem to hint that the greater danger might be deception, the risk that when the true manifestation of divine justice does arrive, perhaps not as a conquering political king, but in a form embodying truth, humility, and genuine compassion, it will be misidentified, rejected, perhaps even opposed, possibly most fiercely by those who are most devoutly expecting something else, something that fit their preconceived notions of power.
So the ultimate battle isn't just against tyranny, but for discernment.
Perhaps. The deepest challenge, suggested by wrestling with these texts about Iran's struggle and its theological underpinnings, might be cultivating the spiritual clarity to recognize true goodness and divine justice when it appears, regardless of the form it takes, and to distinguish it from oppressive systems that merely claim divine authority. That capacity for discernment rooted in recognizing fundamental goodness. Maybe that is the essential preparation for the kingdom we all await. Something to think about.